Welcome back to the Divided States of America show. I'm your host, Marlon Gardenera. Today, we can't avoid the reality in Florida of Hurricane Ian and its potential impacts. We'll also talk about a teacher caught on TikTok, I guess you could say, being xenophobic. And it'll certainly bring up issues of standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and our national anthem. That and more today on the Divided States of America show.
Welcome to the Divided States of America show, where your host, Marlon Gardenera, takes on the most divisive issues in our divided nation. We'll sort through the best and worst of politics and culture, asking questions and looking for answers that our two-ring, two-party circus has failed to provide. And here is your host, Marlon Gardenera.
Welcome back again. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Divided States of America show. We are here weekdays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. You can also watch previous episodes. There are 52 previous episodes. This is what I call a passion project in that I love politics and culture, and you run out of people to talk to. Once you know where they stand and you share the information back and forth, you kind of come to that end and you wish for more. Well, I wish for more in understanding where we are, where we're going, and understanding how we are so divided. It almost doesn't matter what the issue is. Sometimes we go to politics instead of common sense. We go to politics instead of our best interest. We go to looking at me instead of we. And in a nation that was built on the principle of we the people, sometimes I think we're further from that than we've ever been, which, quite frankly, is unfortunate. Now, in the news today, it's unavoidable, the reality. Hurricane Ian is reaching Florida. At the moment, it is a Category 4 while it's still offshore, but the hurricane eye wall, and boy, you know, there's different terms and things that you don't know if you don't live there and you've never experienced hurricanes. My wife is from South Florida, so she has talked about it and described it. And, you know, it's for people that don't live there, it's just a fearful concept that something big and strong can literally just wipe things out. Obviously, it gets you thinking back to Hurricane Andrew and Irene, and I just remember all the names and hurricanes that have come through. But it's not a reality for so many Americans that it's just images and pictures. Some of the images and pictures, and I'll just show you the one that we always reference. We all go back to the Weather Channel. This is live coverage from the Weather Channel on your screen now. You can see the eye of the storm getting close to Fort Myers, and that wall, I guess the wall around the eye is where it's most intense. And my wife described it, it's weird. The wall hits, and the winds and the rain and the damage and destruction is there, and it's real. And then the eye comes over where you are, and it's sunny and normal. My wife talked about that, and you know, I can't imagine the idea of it. Now, if you live in Florida, hurricanes are a thing. There's a season. It's just a reality. I don't get it. I live in Southern California. At the same time, people who live in Florida probably look at people who live in Southern California and they think things like, well, you have earthquakes. And yes, we do. And I'll tell you, the average Californian sleeps through most of them, not even aware they happen. And then we had the big one where I know we lost lives in Northridge, where some freeways collapsed. And obviously those things are it's just crazy, the reality. Now, the infrequency of earthquakes in Southern California, or the damage or lack thereof that it does on a regular basis versus what we see when we look at hurricanes, we think people who live in Florida are crazy, and people in Florida think we're crazy. I went to school in Oklahoma, and I remember my first tornado warning, and I remember being told where my tornado shelter was. It's all a reminder that Mother Nature has her way, and isn't much we can do about it. Obviously, we hear about climate change and the impact it's having. You hear about the media bias. I hear Don Lemon tried to equate Hurricane Ian to climate change and was quickly shut down by people who know better, that isn't the case. So there's so many things that swirl out there, but just that general question and concern for people's safety is just a reality that we all feel when we are away from those incidents. In California, yes, earthquakes. Again, we sleep through most of them. There have been big ones. There are predictions of much larger ones and the damage and the impact. But I don't think most Californians are concerned about it because it doesn't happen that often, because it doesn't do much damage when it does happen. So for most of us who haven't been around for a big one, it doesn't resonate as real fear. Hurricanes, you hear people say, well, you know they're coming and you have time to prepare. It's not the preparation that gets me. Yes, it'd be nice to know an earthquake was coming and be able to get away from it. As you're hearing stories in Florida about Hurricane Irene and people either not leaving or people leaving late, or as I'm hearing reporting now, it's too late to leave. It's too close. You probably couldn't get far enough. There are so many elements that you don't understand because you're not there. Winds of 155 miles an hour still being reported, still showing up in the live coverage of Hurricane Ian in Florida. I think of projectiles, something hitting someone at 155 miles an hour. Obviously, the impact of that is devastating. It certainly can equate to death. People being moved, their homes being destroyed, ripped apart. But in this one, they're talking about the storm surge and the fact that an average, and I've been to Florida, the lack of hills is weird, at least in Miami. I just felt like there weren't any. Maybe if you go over a bridge overpass, that's about as hilly as I remember it being, and I've been to Miami probably a dozen times. But they talk about a storm surge and the reality for people who might be ignoring the warnings. If you're 6 feet tall and the storm surge is expected to be 10 to 12 feet, life isn't necessarily sustainable. I don't care how good of a swimmer you are. They're just realities that people have to deal with. Obviously, our prayers go out to the people in Florida. We share, the concern around the country for their well-being. Hopefully people are hearing the warnings, taking the warnings seriously, and getting out of there. And we hope that this thing starts to minimize. Category 4 right now is being reported on the Weather Channel. We hope that changes and that people make it through it. It's difficult sometimes to talk about the divided nature of our country. Sometimes I have a hard enough time doing it on Fridays in anticipation of a good weekend and good times. So you can imagine when you know there are risks to lives, it just makes you pause and it makes you put it in perspective. There are no politics that can stop a hurricane. Sometimes politics feels like one, and then a real one comes, and people have to deal with that reality, and it helps put it in perspective. Obviously, the support of President Biden. I know he talked to Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, and it seemed like they tried to put aside politics. It's amazing they'll even politicize things like this, but they tried to put aside politics to make sure the federal government is there to provide any and all assistance needed for the residents of Florida. I joke, and I know this isn't a time to joke for the people in Florida. I always joke about people living up in Minnesota and Michigan and about weather and the joke of moving south. Even the birds have figured out to move south. And then there are times like this where south isn't so great just because of the Mother Nature's impact on the south. I lived in the Midwest. Tornadoes scared the lights out of me. The idea that it could just pop in, you get a little warning and you go to a shelter, but your home could be gone, your neighborhood could be gone, lives are destroyed. It's everywhere. It doesn't matter where you live. And I've grown to understand the reality of home and family and friends and your normal is what people adhere to. So the idea that everybody should move to Southern California because we have the best weather and I'd like to think we have the least issues is silly. They're everywhere. So just be careful. If you're in Florida, really, be careful. We're thinking of you. The Weather Channel coverage, you get the mixture of bravery of people willing to stand there and report and help you in Florida get away and in all regions. I never understood storm chasers. I never understood tornado. I never got it. I understand it from a research perspective, but I never got it. But again, the people that are in Florida trying to cover it and give people information, as you can see on screen right now, you're getting live coverage from the Weather Channel of the storm. And as you see there, a storm surge of up to 18 feet possible. Just praying for the people there, hoping they get through it safely. You just watch it on television and it doesn't resonate unless you've actually been there. So for the people there, again, take care of yourselves. Now, this happened a few days ago, but it will probably reach national prominence over the next couple of days. A teacher was caught on TikTok for comments made to a student who didn't stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Here's a picture of that teacher. I believe the student is on the left. It hasn't been identified, but I know over 2.3 million people have seen this on TikTok. And because we're talking about it now and I'm seeing it all over the news, I'm sure that number is going to jump. I'm sure TikTok is going to add users interested in hearing word for word what exactly happened in this particular incident. But it's going to cover a lot of things. Number one, what a teacher can say and can't say to a student, how that teacher's investigation and final determination. The teacher's already been removed from the classroom, but will the teacher be fired? But it's going to stoke memories of Colin Kaepernick and his taking a knee for the national anthem. And you're already seeing some of the responses from some of the people in that area. I'm going to go ahead and play a clip from a local news station in the Manatee County area.
Of a student not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance in a classroom at Manatee High School is going viral on TikTok. People from Bradenton and beyond are weighing in.
When I used to go to school, sometimes I wouldn't get up because personal problems that I didn't want to get up. I know it's to show respect and stuff, but if you don't want to get up, it's nobody's business. And for the teacher to say like a racial comment to a student like that, that's disrespect. And I think sometimes you should keep your words to yourself.
Take a look at this TikTok video with a teacher apparently yelling at a student for not standing during the Pledge of Allegiance. People from various walks of life in a school environment. There are many thought processes on this episode at Manatee High School.
I think it should still have to, you still should have to do that in school. In the morning time, at least. Even if you don't put your hand across your chest, at least stand with your classmates. Be proud to be American.
We have those people in this country that have a brittle spirit. They feel some kind of way when they see people not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance or taking a knee at a sporting event. And you have those who want to flip it into a discussion about the veterans.
According to the Manatee County School District, they do confirm this incident.
Manatee County School District also put out a statement for everyone when questioned about this. And they said the teacher no longer has contact with any students. In addition, the school district's office of professional standards is thoroughly investigating the incident in accordance with the district and state due process policies and procedures. That came from a district spokesperson in Florida. Here's the reality. District has policies on this issue. They have stated those policies. And the part I think that got me in trying to understand what are they going to do, how are they going to approach this. They said the school district of Manatee County strongly condemns any language or behavior that degrades, humiliates, or insults any individuals. I'm guessing that this is all of the above. And you often hear, and again, we need to have a show on teachers and obviously their impact on our country, impact on our children, the importance, the low pay, the pressures, COVID, parents, outrage, parents trying to dictate what is taught, even if it's a small group of parents trying to impact what is taught for others, and not necessarily including discussions with the teachers on what's appropriate, why it's appropriate. There's so many things happening in the world of teachers. But degrading students is never high on their list of things that they're supposed to do. And you can hear it with your own ears. You go to TikTok, and you can hear the full video. You can hear the words. But what is catching the attention of most people are these specific words. Then go back to, and there's a pause, where are you from? Mexico or Guatemala? And the student says, no, I was born here. Two parts of the issue. The first one, a teacher degrading a student based on what he believes is the student's race or ethnicity. It's just wrong. You don't get the option of talking to my child that way. I would imagine many of you out there, despite how you feel about whether a child should stand and honor the symbols of our country, the Pledge of Allegiance, the national anthem, I'm sure most of you are very clear on what is or isn't appropriate for your child, but identifying them by their race and ethnicity and using that as an explanation or the motive for your anger It wouldn't fly with my kids. So the idea that they were identifying them as being from somewhere else when they're actually from here goes into the larger issue of how we're dealing with our border, how we're dealing with illegal immigration. And we've had shows on it. I encourage you to go back and take a look at those. But you can't tell where someone is actually from by looking at them. But a form of bigotry and prejudice and racism or xenophobia is very clearly identifying someone as not American, as if to be American means that you must be white. Now, there are other colors that people don't question someone's nationality. I don't think in general people question the nationality of a black person. Maybe depending on their skin tone, maybe someone darker, they might associate or affiliate with Africa correctly or incorrectly. But for the most part, the idea that you would ask someone where they're from based on their race or ethnicity doesn't take into the account that there's a high likelihood they are American citizens. Not that someone being from somewhere else should give you the ability to degrade them, but when you do it just based on impression, it is bigotry and prejudice and racism in the truest form, in the most simple form. It really is. And the idea that it's from a teacher to a student, you hope that the teacher is handled appropriately for taking that tone and that approach. Accountability for that is far greater now than I ever remembered in U.S. history, which is a sign that we are making progress on some fronts as it relates to bigotry, racism, and the professional world where things used to be more tolerated and now they're not. I hope, based on what I heard from the teacher, that the teacher is removed, that the teacher doesn't get an opportunity to do that with other students. Now, is that harsh? Potentially. But do I think people being held accountable for it is worse than the impact of it when you're on the other side of bigotry, other side of prejudice, other side of racism? No, I think racism has done more damage to our country than almost anything else. I think sexism has done more damage to America than almost anything else. We focus on a lot of things, but people that don't look like a white majority are often not the focal point. We have to have eras like the civil rights era to make progress, but even when those progress or that progress is stalled, or even when there's still hiccups and people try to do something to change that, that becomes the issue. And that brings me back to Colin Kaepernick. Now, let me just say without question, without hesitation, before you start asking, I do not take a knee for the national anthem. I stand. I honor our country. I stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Those are my personal views, and despite the areas where I think there are issues that need to be discussed, need to be at the center of our attention and come to a conclusion, not just the vitriol, not just the hatred for the opposite sides. Those things are real, and I don't believe everyone feels the same about all things, so the idea that we have to or we're supposed to is wrong to me. I don't encourage people to take a knee. I don't encourage people to sit down for the pledge. But the idea, and one lady suggested it in the video, that it should be mandatory, I think that goes too far. I would highly encourage it. And I want everybody to feel like the symbols of America represent them, such that they actually want to honor them. But the same people who are typically critical about those taking a knee or not standing for the pledge are also very clear on their Second Amendment. They're very clear on their freedoms and their rights. So I'm always confused when they question someone else's freedoms and rights, and they use excuses or qualifiers to say, oh, well, yes, they have a right, but in this situation, they still shouldn't blank, 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 blank. Like people who are on the other side of the Second Amendment, who believe that you have a right to bear arms and protect yourself, but they should be regulated so school children can't be slaughtered easily by people who shouldn't have guns getting access to guns they don't necessarily need to just protect themselves. So if it is a well-regulated process, we need to do a better job regulating it. Obviously, this is just American culture. It's just the politics of the day. It's just another controversy in the day. Hopefully we agree a teacher can't talk to students that way. I don't know where there's a lot of room for that, unless you think that students have to think like you. And if they don't, teachers should treat them any way they want based on any characteristic they want. And racism and bigotry and prejudice and disrespect, those things are all secondary to the symbols. I said this during Colin Kaepernick. Again, I stand for the pledge. I stand for the national anthem. I was moved on September 11th, 2022, when the police officer in New Jersey at a football game for the NFL started singing the anthem, and then people started singing louder, so the officer stopped so we could hear the crowd beautifully singing our national anthem, and then the officer picked up at the very end. I was moved by it. Those symbols mean something to me. They do. But within the freedoms of our Constitution, whether it be to protest or freedom of speech, if you're actually into freedoms and not just the freedoms that you like, you have to respect that people have the freedom to not feel those things in every moment of their life and not want to honor those symbols in every moment of their life. I personally disagree. I personally don't do that. But if you are for freedom and liberty, you have to understand other people have the right to not go down the same road you do. And if you are willing to treat people poorly, if you are willing to disrespect people, if you allow bigotry and racism and prejudice to seep up because people didn't do what you want, you are as much a problem to me as the people that didn't do what you wanted them to do. Is it illegal? I don't know. I think this school has very clear rules. They said they strongly condemn any language or behavior that degrades, humiliates, or insults any individual. So if they stick to that policy, there'll be a consequence for this particular teacher, who, by the way, has already been removed from the classroom. But the freedom you have to decide if you want to honor a symbol on a given day, the freedom you may want to use if you feel like the symbols have hurt you or people like you, if you are protesting a moment or a window of time where you'd like those symbols to better represent you, or you'd like the nation as a whole to do a better job on specific issues, the idea that you don't have the freedom to express that seems like there are some who are going to be picking and choosing which freedoms they are okay with. Those people who prefer the Supreme Court to be constitutionalists, again, it'll be interesting to see how people pick and choose which issues make the most sense to them. Now, we already know that the symbols often represent our veterans. They represent patriotism. They represent things that are really important to people, and those are fair representations. And for a lot of people, including me, they do represent some of those things. But again, I'll say this: the symbols aren't more important than the people they're supposed to represent. The symbols aren't more important than the people they're supposed to represent. There are people in America who feel their rights, their existence as citizens, their education, their health care, their access to jobs and housing and loans and all of the things that we consider a part of the American dream are inhibited. They are more difficult based purely on some of these characterizations, much like the teacher who asked the student if they're from Mexico or Guatemala when in fact they were born here. The symbols can't be bigger than the people they're supposed to represent, because we may have symbols, but we may not do a good job representing all of our people. And those people may want to use the symbols to protest. It may be uncomfortable. It may be disrespectful to you. It may be disrespectful to you because those symbols represent something entirely different. But at some point, we're going to have to understand that we don't have to have one thought on all things. As I talk about the divide, part of it is thoughtful, respectful conversations so that we can discuss the divide. If someone doesn't think a symbol represents them well, they should be able to then discuss why we should be receptive and have a true discussion on, are there things we can do in our country to make our country better so the symbol is more representative of everyone in it. They don't have to put aside their own personal battles or the racism or prejudice or sexism or homophobia or xenophobia, the things that they experience. They don't have to put themselves completely aside in favor of a symbol they don't think is honoring them. Believe me, I wish everybody stood. I wish everybody felt what I do when I stand, when I say the pledge, when I sing the national anthem. But I recognize and respect that not everyone does. I hope that we will tackle, address, or deal with more of the divide so that it isn't as big a deal in the future when people do pause or hesitate because something isn't right. The idea of it being mandatory, I think, is too far. I would like to encourage it. I'd like people to feel the same thing I feel and do it. But the idea that it has to be mandatory is crazy. But then it also brings up a couple other things. And today's show is quick. I wanted to give you my quick take on this situation. The flag, the national anthem, are incredible symbols of our country that people demand you respect. I was curious why that didn't apply to the Capitol, because many of the people who will have the biggest issue with the student sitting didn't have an issue with the insurrection at the Capitol. Some of those people call it political discourse, as if a student sitting during the pledge couldn't be political discourse as well. I wonder why this screams the dismay, the frustration and anger that people will feel for the student not sitting, enough that they'll defend the teacher, protect the teacher, think the teacher is a hero, didn't apply to the Capitol. I'm wondering why that symbolic importance didn't apply to our election, where there was actually talk of using a fake set of electors, a created one from people with an interest other than what the voters wanted. I wonder why the lack of consistency in our country is so real, but it all contributes to the divide. The divide is obvious. The divide is real on almost every subject. So this one's going to be interesting as it plays out throughout our country, because you'll be hearing more and more about it. It started on TikTok. A student recorded it. A student recorded a teacher saying, then go back to, pause, where are you from, Mexico or Guatemala? Which I think is connected to the vitriol people feel towards brown people, towards people who don't look like them, towards people that they suspect might be illegal when there is no indication based on the way a person looks, whether they are legal or not. But I think that's also part of our culture. I think we're in a bad place politically. When I go out and see my neighbor, I don't know what their political persuasion is. We have things in common, our community, our lawns, our street, the safety, the trash. I don't care what it is. We don't have to go to the level where politics is the most important thing. But when we get to politics, when we get to differences in belief, the divide is ugly. I hope we can be better. I hope teachers have higher expectations of themselves and what they can say to students based on their race or ethnicity. I hope the school districts take a stand, make an issue out of these things so that we can help avoid it in the future. And I hope we have more discussions about the differences we feel for symbols, the differences we feel for the lives people actually live in our country, and that we don't make knee-jerk reactions that then require people to do what we do the way we would do it. But I think where there's likely consensus, you can't talk to a child any way you want to, certainly not mine, and I'm guessing you would imagine you don't want people talking to your child in interesting ways. We certainly hear people screaming if you say the word gay. We certainly hear people screaming about transgender folks. We certainly hear people screaming about certain books. There are so many reasons people are standing up to what's being said to their children. I hope they take issue with a child being called out because of their race, ethnicity, when not standing. We have to be better. And if we're not better, we have to at least start the process of talking about it, find consensus, find moderation, find the people who don't exist on both extremes, and make sure that their voices are heard louder than even politicians. We don't exist purely on the thoughts and beliefs of politicians, political leaders. We guide America. Our silence does too. Where do you weigh in on this issue? All right, future episodes of the show will include some interesting topics, just to give you an idea where we expect to be going in the next couple of days. Interestingly enough, there are lots of Democrats changing their tune on crime. Things that they once supported aren't on the top of their list of things to be concerned about today. Imagine that. We'll get into it. Also, the Supreme Court is moving further right, away from the American majority. How do you feel about some of the decisions and some of the cases they're taking up? And we're going to get to Brett Favre. It's kind of hard to talk about Colin Kaepernick and the backlash for him taking a knee and not talk about Brett Favre and the millions of dollars he lobbied for that I guess people believe would have been better served if they went to people in need. We'll cover that and a lot more on the Divided States of America show, weekdays at noon, 3 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. I look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks for watching the Divided States of America show. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the channel and share this video with your family and friends.